I'm so looking forward to this coming weekend because we have a long weekend. And I was like, because I'm now really like into my novel, I'm like, oh, I just want to write everything down this weekend and just like write. But you know, the problem that I stumbled upon just now as I was working on my work in progress, I would be sitting there and I know exactly what I want to happen in this scene. And I like know exactly what's going to happen, and it's like playing off in my brain. And then I'm like, who's going to write this? Because now I have to write this. And I was like, it's all fun and games when it's in my head, but I'm like, now I have to write it all out. I'm like, that's going to take forever.
Now I have to actually choose the right words and describe what I'm seeing.
But I've actually been doing pretty well with my first draft, not editing while I'm writing. So I'm actually quite proud of myself.
I got back into editing my project last week, the one that I just finished a few months ago. I finally
Ooh.
got myself around to wanting to edit. So I'm excited about that.
That is exciting. So generally I have like a one book, one edit rule per year. So I want to write like one book a year and one edit one a year. So I usually tend to edit the one that I wrote the previous year.
Mhm.
Yeah, I haven't gotten to the editing part yet.
Editing is one of those things I feel like you need to give yourself that break. If you don't give yourself a long enough break for your brain, then the editing just doesn't work right anyway. So I'm happy to get to it when my brain's happy to get to it, even if it's 3 months later.
But also, it's perfect for me because I forgot what I ate yesterday. So for me to have to remember what my character did that I wrote 6 months ago, it's all new to me. So I'm just like, "Ooh, this is interesting. Didn't know this plot twist. Where did this come from?" So speaking of work in progresses and editing, like I was thinking about the previous novel that I wrote, and it was like a romance suspense. And today's topic is actually so perfect because I think I did it all wrong. Because we are talking about foreshadowing, and since my book is a romance suspense, I was like, yeah, you need to have this little tidbits in between to actually reveal something in the end. And I was like, did I do that though, or did I just think I did it?
Well, I have to say that was a terrible foreshadow into the topic of foreshadowing. We have a lot to say about this. So I'm getting my apple juice. I've had a cold and my voice might sound funny to everybody. I'm sorry, but I have my apple juice to keep myself hydrated. What are you drinking today?
There you go. So I have my coffee to keep me awake. Because it's raining outside and it's cloudy and it's cold because we're, going into winter. Technically, it's still autumn. And so I just want to be cool
Yeah.
up in bed and sleep. So, but I have to be awake. All right. Are we ready for this episode?
We're ready.
Hey ho, let's go. Hello! Welcome to Tea and Tales. We are so happy to have you here with us. I'm Madeline Now.
And I am Sarah Sampson. We want to especially thank Erica Luck Dean and Lucas J. Smith for tuning in to our podcast. As Nell said, we are talking about foreshadowing today. I didn't warn Nell about this, but I think half of the problem with the foreshadowing argument is if you are a plotter, you're going to work out your foreshadowing very different than if you are a pantser. As a pantser, for me, sometimes I'll be going along, I'll be like, ooh, that's a really neat little element I just worked in there. Let's see if it goes through the whole book. And then when I'm done, I have to decide, is that foreshadowing or is that just me and I need to delete that? Did that go through the whole book? Did it not? Do I want to keep it? And then I have to plan out the foreshadowing later. I feel like sometimes we can argue about that simply because we're really arguing over when are you scheduling in and planning in the foreshadowing and making sure it's purposeful.
Yeah. I just kind of think it depends on what type of writing style you have. Not necessarily what type of writer you are, like a plotter or a planter, but just kind of what writing style do you have. And it's actually quite interesting because the other day one of my colleagues asked me like how I was doing on my book. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm like 5,000 words in, very chuffed with myself. And she was like, oh my gosh, that is so amazing. And I'm like, well, thank you. I know. But then we continued talking and I was telling her about like the different types of like elements you have to look out for when you're writing your novel and things like that. And then she asked me, how do I write my novels? Do I like have a scene? Do I start at the end? Do I start at the beginning? And so I was like, well, personally I like to write in chronological order. So for me, I need to start at the beginning and then I need to work through my story up until the end. Or what I would usually do is I've like climatic scenes in my story. And so I know how my book starts, I know like the important parts in there, and I know how it ends. And then I will kind of fill in the transition scenes in between. But yeah, generally I work from the beginning to the end. But other people might not. Some people might start at the end and then they go to the middle and then they go to the end again and then they start at the beginning. So it kind of just depends on how you write. I mean, if you are one of those writers that have a first draft and it's like super detailed and like everything is in it, then good for you. I am not. So for me, a first draft is literally just like writing the storyline and getting all the thoughts out and things like that. Then when you go to your second, third, fourth draft, that is where you kind of put in the meat. So I think that is where you can actually start thinking about your foreshadowing and how to interpret these little like details into your story that then leads to that climatic end.
Because I'm a pantser, I don't start with anything. I start with, I love this character and I'm creating this world in my head. So I'm just going to run with it and see what happens. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, then I'll put it to the side and see if I can make it work another day. But I've also found that as I'm doing that, my brain likes to put in the foreshadowing. So as I'm writing, it'll be like, ooh, here's where we're going to head. And it plans out big points in the rest of the book. So I start putting in the little foreshadowing, but it always comes off a little awkward in that first draft because I don't actually know when I get to writing those points how exactly it's going to pull off until I write it. And so then I always have to go back and fix and tweak and add things and, you know, get my fingers down into those little depths and cracks. And I feel like people who do the exact opposite and even start with like a zero draft where they have written what each scene is going to do and all the little things that are going to happen, and they've plotted out all of the little foreshadowing bits and the character arc bits and blah, 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 blah. They're going to come out with a first draft that then probably has a lot more of the foreshadowing consistent, but they've also done work before the first draft that I haven't done. Everybody has to do it. So when are you making it part of your process?
Well, what I have found interesting though, because now I'm writing a paranormal romance and it's not something that I generally would write. And it's so weird because even though this is my first draft and even though I'm writing down the story, I'm actually more careful about my writing, which sounds weird, but because I know this is paranormal and I know they are in a certain world with certain elements that emphasizes the paranormal of the story, as I'm writing my scene, I'm like, ooh, but this could be a place where this might be highlighted. And then I would move to something else and then I'm like, ooh, but if he does this, or if he shows this, or if this happens, then that will also kind of give the reader a clue to what might continue to happen. So I have found that very interesting since I've never quite actually done it before, because I think generally in romance, I don't tend to do foreshadowing because to me it's just more about the meet cute, the love story, and that's it. It's not like a crime novel. So then I'm just like, I don't really focus on that much.
I think you bring up a really good point there where it's like, so what am I foreshadowing? What can I foreshadow? And we found a few really good resources. I say we, I mean, Model and I found them. Ellen Peterson on Instagram, you found a really good resource from her. I loved how she started talking about foreshadowing because instead of just jumping into all of the, well, you could do this to foreshadow and you could do that. She talks about what are you foreshadowing exactly? And once you know that, what event, what character arc, whatever that you're foreshadowing is, then you can plan how you're going to foreshadow it. I know it like feels like, well, duh, I have to know what I'm foreshadowing before I actually planned it out. But she took that step back and I had to be real with myself and think, do I always stop and think that? Like, what is it exactly that I'm trying to foreshadow so that these clues can be the correct clues?
100%. And actually, when I read her post that she did, I never even thought about the different types of foreshadowing that you can get, because you can literally get like a plot twist, or you can even have a foreshadowing for your character arc, which is something I actually never thought about, or you could do something for like a major event. That actually somehow even broadened my mind more to the possibilities of what I can actually do with my book. There's different types of ways that you can put foreshadowing into your novel.
It also opened my mind to, I don't have to be writing some crazy epic fantasy that obviously is going to have foreshadowing, for the big events coming, but it could be something small like the character arc of a character. And that goes into every genre.
Though, okay, can I just side note though, okay? So, as a very beginner writer, okay, you don't know writing slang or like writer words and stuff like that. It's something that you kind of come into once you start like learning more about the industry, which is why we're doing this podcast to teach you. And so the first time I heard foreshadowing, you know what it reminded me of? I don't know why, but I was like, oh, you mean like a prologue and an epilogue? And I was like, those are definitely not the same thing.
They can have strong foreshadowing, but yeah.
Yeah, because I was like four, so I was like before, so prologue. I was like, sounds similar to me. So for someone who is like a beginner writer, Sarah, before we jump into how you can actually put foreshadowing into your novel, like tell some of our listeners who haven't heard about it before or are new to it, like what is foreshadowing, and do you not need to you really use it?
Foreshadowing is the elements in the book that hint to big events, twists, or character changes happening later in the book. They're going to be small little tidbits. They're going to be passing thoughts. Sometimes the reader may not even catch on to them. As a very subtle writer myself, I always have this problem where I have readers go, I never even caught that. And then later in the book, they go, I see why that's there now, with my beta readers and my alpha readers who question like everything. They don't just read. Not all books need to have it. I feel like for readers like me who love the let me put the puzzle together, let me see if I can figure out where you're going. I love to read to think, not just to enjoy. I like having foreshadowing. I like having a lot of foreshadowing. My husband hates it when I figure things out early, which I do quite often figure things out early. But I feel like there is a place for not having foreshadowing. And if you are the type of writer who wants to reach readers who want to just sit with a very sweet meet cute and enjoy the story and don't want to think very hard, maybe you're going to use less foreshadowing, or it's going to be a lot lighter, maybe not there at all, even if they're not thinking deeply about your novel. The foreshadowing can add elements of, I see how this came together at the end, as all the pieces fall together and the big events or changes happen. Foreshadowing helps it to make sense in the reader's mind when they get there.
That is very thorough and well explained.
We know what it is. We know what sort of things we can use it for. What are some of your favorite ways that you have either seen or used foreshadowing?
One book that I actually loved, which I think was such great foreshadowing, is it's called A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. And it's a 3-book series. Technically there's more, but it's like the 0.270, I don't know, type of book in the middle type of vibes. But that book was really nice for me in a sense that, yes, it was foreshadowing, but it was done in such a way that you actually went on the journey with the character. So as she was finding clues, you were finding clues. And as she was like searching for new evidence or stuff like that, you were doing that. And that kind of helped you to figure out who the murderer was, or who the foreshadowing arc, where it led to, which was really nice.
I think what you're saying there is it felt natural and it felt purposeful. As the character went through, you felt immersed and moving along with them. There wasn't jerky moments where it was like, wait, where did that come from? That wasn't there before.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that novel is also a great example of you can use more than one element to put foreshadowing in, because naturally the main character had her character arc that she had foreshadowing for, but also the storyline had a foreshadowing and the plot twist had a foreshadowing. So how about you? Like, what has been examples for you of great foreshadowing?
Goodness, I have so many. Foreshadowing is huge in epic fantasy, which is what I read the most. So N.K. Jemisin, she wrote, adore her. She uses foreshadowing exceptionally well. And one of the things that she uses in her foreshadowing is the element of mystery. So her foreshadowing is not always subtle. You know she's foreshadowing something. You know she's trying to get you to think about something. But then she says, ooh, this creepy thing is happening and this thing right here is interesting and you don't quite understand it. And now we're going to go over here. back to our main character, and we're going to follow them. And you know this as the little reader over here. Try to figure out why that's important to our character. And eventually they do come together, you know. But I love her style of doing that because it gives me, as the reader, something to chew on, to know that there's deeper things going on than what the character's POV is showing. And it's a little bit more blatant. You know that there's a foreshadowing there. You know that there's something coming. But she does it in a way that doesn't give away everything. It doesn't feel like a spoiler. It feels like a flavor taste. That now, as the character's going forward and all of the little subtle hints are being dropped, if you're remembering what she told you before, you can figure it out as the character goes along, even before the character does. I love that style of foreshadowing, being able to be blatant but also be mysterious.
And I think we also saw that when we had Bianca Mare on our previous season, because she had a most puzzling murder novel that she brought out, and she had different POVs, which also made you as the reader know facts that the main character didn't know, which then gave you the opportunity to kind of figure it out before the main character.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting, it's a difficult style to do, in that you have to keep in mind what your reader knows and what your character knows, and then make it feel, as the reader is like, oh, I already know this, now the character's figuring it out. Make sure that it feels natural for the character to figure it out in the way that they are figuring it out. And that can mess with a writer's brain, because it's hard sometimes to remember who knows what and how they know it and what kind of personality do they have to being able to figure it out. But I also love the super, super, super subtle. Like, I'm giving you nothing blatantly. There's no huge clues that, hey, maybe you should pay attention to this while you're doing that. But they're just slipped in dialogue. It's slipped in a description. Maybe you're going along and they just happen to see something or hear something, and then they move on with their life because the character is like, I don't care. But later that little thing builds and builds, and all those clues build up to something big in the end that the character needed to pay attention to. That's the style that I write the most, where if I mention somebody or if I mention something, it is likely this is foreshadowing to something, and you should probably pay attention to that little detail. But then I move on from it, and it's like, well, did I even need to know that? Yes, you did. Then when you finish reading the story, and when you go back and reread the story because you love the story, then you see all the foreshadowing from the beginning. And it's like reading a completely different story.
Yep, 100%. It's like there's this series on Netflix called A Family Affair with Nicole Kidman. And that was literally like you were watching the series, and then you're like, is it this person? Is it that person? And then in the end, when you know who the person is, if you watch it again, you're like, oh, that was a clue. That was also a clue. What was I doing while I was watching this? Because that was also a clue.
Why didn't I catch those? And I try to catch all those clues as a reader. Like, if I'm going through and I'm like, there's no clues here, then I'm going to be bored. But if I'm like, that's a clue, and that's a clue, and that's a clue, and so now my brain is piling them on, you're trying to distract me with the shiny story and plot over here, and I'm like, I saw you.
Sometimes I think to myself, I'd love to be a detective, because I love like watching crime stories and novels and read it and all these things. Then I read a book and then I got the wrong killer, and I'm like, yeah, that's probably not a great industry for me to go into. I would miss every single clue.
I love how the Writer's Sanctuary, we'll put this in the show notes as well. The Writer's Sanctuary had an Instagram post where they really broke down a lot of the different ways you can utilize these hints, from having distinct emotions that foreshadows a heavy emotional toll that's coming, to an object or a behavior that puts doubt in your mind about somebody, or just puts a little question in your mind about something.
Things they highlighted or they talked about is, as we've mentioned before, you kind of need to make it feel natural, because I think if you make it too obvious, then the reader is also going to lose interest, the same way as if you make it way too subtle and nobody can read it at all. So I think it's so hard. I think it's the same like with showing versus telling. Like, there's such a fine line between doing it well and doing it terribly wrong. When you have to make it feel natural, it's like you've said, like in your descriptions, in your dialogue, there's so many fun ways you can actually use it to utilize those foreshadowing bits and pieces into it. I always find it so funny when people are reading it, they're like, oh, is this going to mean something? And I'm just like, no, that's just a number. And they're like, no, but you can't just have a number. They're like, it has to mean something. And I'm like, why? I'm like, it's just a number. Or then I would go to a different scene and they're like, oh my gosh, she picked up her phone. Is this going to mean something? And I'm like, have you never picked up your phone as a person before? I'm like, I feel that's a very natural thing to do. No, there's no foreshadowing here. Calm down. This is not a murder mystery. So clearly, I do not know how to do foreshadowing because I'm terrible at it. Or I do it and I don't even know I'm doing it. So that's why beta readers are so important because they will point out these things and you're like, no, that's not what I meant to do. So then you will take it out. Or then you will be like, oh, I didn't think of it this way, but now that you mention it, that might be a foreshadowing thing that I want to put into my novel type of vibes.
I can use that, or I can use it as a misdirect. That's one of the other elements that I really enjoyed, was misdirecting you into the wrong conclusion about the clue. The writer's sanctuary specifically talked about using your characters to misinterpret the clues, have them misunderstand something that somebody does, or misunderstand what they said or what they saw. And the readers will often take that false lead. And you have to do it well, because if the reader doesn't take your false lead, then they're just going to be like, oh yeah, that character's kind of stupid. So you have to be able to move it into with this natural flow that Madeline and I was talking about, and able to use the elements to move your reader the way you want them to go. I love character misdirect, and I get so like excited when it works on me. And when it doesn't work on me, I still question, like, okay, it's either going to do this or this now. I'm watching for both. I have to watch for both because I don't know if you're misdirecting me or not.
I know, keeping you at the edge of your seat, Sarah. I think that's when you know what you enjoy reading, but also you enjoy the specific author's writing, which then makes you want to read their other novels as well. One of the things that actually made me think twice when I read it is they talked about to distract with emotion. And I've never thought about it because they say you should have foreshadowing happen during an emotional or action heavy moment. So readers can focus on what's happening, not what it means. And I was like, ooh, that is actually quite smart when you think about it. Because usually when you have like a big action happening or a big climatic scene, that is kind of where the reader's focus is. So that is actually the perfect moment to slip in a little clue or a little detail, something like that, to lead to something else.
And I think that when you use emotion that way, it hits the reader stronger. You know deeper, not just logically, but emotionally that there's something going on. And I want to kind of combine that one with one of their other points to match the tone, but not the content, where you use that emotion as a mismatch now, where the scene is quiet, everything is fine, things are great, but then you add that undertone, that little bit of dread, that little bit of unease, or a question in the character's mind that doesn't make sense, but their intuition is telling them that something's going on. And when you use emotion in that way, in this mismatch way, then it brings in a different mood and imagery into the reader's mind. So we're now going to watch for why did they feel that way? Why does it seem okay, but it's not?
When you said that, it immediately made me think of one of the songs in the Hamilton musical. So there's a song, You'll Be Back, which is where King George just sings. And it plays so well with this like mismatched tone, in a sense that there's this line that says, oceans rise, empires fall. And so fall goes up instead of going down, and rise goes down instead of going up. And it makes you think twice also to be like, that's not usually how this goes, so what's happening here?
Even if the hearer doesn't really recognize that's what happened, their subconscious starts going, something's wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other one they have, and I think this is like my biggest obstacle in writing. I mean, yes, okay, there are other obstacles, but this one, trust the reader. And I'm just like, listen, I've tried trusting my readers, but they are stupid. Because I'm like, what do you mean you don't understand what I'm telling you? It's simply something I should be working on. Like, I 100% will agree with that. But then sometimes I would be sitting here and I would be writing something and I'm like, no, 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 Madeleine, trust your reader. They know what you're talking about. And then I gave it to my beta readers and they're like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, I gave you my trust. Like, I think that is one of the hardest things that I struggle with when writing is when to trust my reader. Because I don't know, maybe I'm just not vibing with it. And I think that's the problem we have as writers because in your brain, you know every little single thing. Like, you know more than the entire novel is long. And so I think that might be what happens is that I would be writing something and naturally I'm like, yeah, it happens or it did happen or something like that. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, it happened in my head, but not on the page.
I totally feel you there. My reader group has learned that I like foreshadowing and I love putting my foreshadowing in. They try to watch for it. But I've learned to interpret their comments when they say something like, ooh, this is interesting, or I didn't think about that this way. If it's one of my foreshadowing moments, I note it down. Like, what are they thinking here? And I'll ask them when we're in the call, I'll be like, so what do you think that means? Sometimes one person found it and other people didn't. And so I can kind of judge how strong of a foreshadowing it is if I'm being too blatant because everybody's like, oh yeah, this is going to happen. Or if one person's like, I don't know, but this is very interesting. I'm going to keep my eye on this. And everybody else goes, wait, what? Like, I saw that, but I didn't see that. Then I know that my foreshadowing is working. The more interesting feedback, useful feedback that I have had from them in this arena is as they get to the end and into those big reveal points, they are able to say, I can see where your foreshadowing worked. Or they can say, I didn't catch this nearly enough by the time I got here and it feels clunky and it feels this, that, the other. And then since they've read rest of the book, we have very interesting conversations about what if I added this here? What if I tweaked that there? And they help me to build out that foreshadowing through the end of the book from a reader perspective so it doesn't feel clunky and then I can tie it all together.
Don't you just love like your critique groups? They are my favorite people in the whole wide world. I mean, I love sharing my pages with them and I like appreciate the feedback that I get from them because it's not always nice. It's truthful, which I like. But the part that I love the most is literally like we would be sitting and they would be talking about a scene or talking about like a moment and they're like, yeah, are they doing that or what is it leading towards? And so then as soon as you start explaining it, they're like, okay, but what if, what if, what if? And I think, side note though, like that is such a big thing about the writer community. And we spoke about this when we had our beta reading episode with Connor and Rose, where it's like just because you're in a beta reading group or a critique group and people are giving you ideas doesn't mean that you are not a writer or you're stealing their ideas or anything like that. They're helping you making it better. And I mean, that's what acknowledgement pages are for, to acknowledge the help that you've gotten from other people. Because I feel like writing is even a teamwork thing if you do it well, because I think we all do need it. But yeah, that was a whole side note to the notes that we are making.
And as a reader myself, I love commenting when I'm beta reading. I will comment, I feel like this is coming. Don't tell me if it is or not, but this is what it is making me think. It's what it's making me feel. And I'm not telling them they're doing it wrong. I'm telling them I'm seeing this. If it's purposeful, then this is the job it's doing. It's not to tell them, you know, your foreshadowing is bad or good. It's just telling them what job it's doing so they can judge if that's what they want it to be doing. So you had a third resource that you pulled out, AJ Saxma, and he talked about how if your foreshadowing is failing, it's not because it's subtle, it's because it's not escalating. And I feel like that's a lot of what we're talking about right now is beta readers will tell you if it's escalating properly, if it's building on itself, because one hint does not make a foreshadow. It has to be consistent. It has to build and build and build so that the reader can put all the pieces together and have this picture that you're trying to make sense when the big reveal happens.
Yeah, and I will definitely recommend any listener to go watch his Instagram post about this topic because he gives a great example as well, also about how to escalate those clues that you put into your novel.
I would highly recommend looking closer at all three of the resources as well. There are things that they talked about we couldn't even cover in this episode of ways to put in your foreshadowing, making sure it's timed correctly, and making sure that it feels earned. Because if it's not earned, you're going to lose the reader. The reader's going to not enjoy it if they are too surprised or if the reveal comes out too fast. So there's a lot of nuance to foreshadowing, and I really hope that this has helped you think about your foreshadowing, what foreshadowing you want to have, how much you want to have, and to refine your foreshadowing skills.
Absolutely. And I'm going to leave you now so that I can go work on apparently foreshadowing that I have in my novel that I don't even know about.
We like to keep things short here on Tea and Tales. Get your fingers back on the keyboard and your pens back on paper.
And if you like what we are doing here, if you love the topics that we are discussing and the guests that we have on, go follow us on Instagram, Threads, and Facebook at Tea and Tales Podcast, and on Twitter /X and TikTok at Podcast Tea Tales. And go to YouTube and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well, because then you can see our lovely faces while we entertain you. Then, to help our algorithm and to help all writers all over the world, or people in the literary industry, to share and see these videos and topics that we are talking about, go to that purple icon on your device, go to Spotify, go like, go share, go comment, and tell us how you have interpreted foreshadowing in your novel, so that you can go help us go up, it's a moment.
And join us next week where we talk about libraries and programs writers encourage and ways that you can utilize your libraries. Joining us for that is author and librarian Danielle Ellison, and she is brilliant. Happy writing.
Bye.